All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, there's a national debate in America right now about school reopening. Parents are scared. The science is unclear at best. And many nations around the world are ranging from results that are fantastic to some regrets in places like Israel. The issue has become a partisan one in recent months, with Democrats and Joe Biden largely urging caution on school reopening, and with the Trump administration dead set on having schools reopen, going so far as to threaten to withhold federal funding from districts if they refuse to do so. Yesterday, we got a small glimpse into public opinion on school reopenings, and it seems that Americans are dramatically not on the Republican side, with a full 62% of Americans saying it will be unsafe to reopen schools, only 31% who think that it is. Among parents, the numbers are slightly better, with 57% saying unsafe, 37% saying safe. But that slight difference doesn't mean much when in both cases, a clear majority of the country is against a now mainstream Republican position. This struck me because it made something very clear. Pretty much every single thing that the mainstream Republican Party has advocated on coronavirus has turned out to be both wrong and bad, but worse, dramatically against the will of the American public. In fact, I think we are now in a position where if Trump or the GOP says something on coronavirus, that they're so wildly distrusted by the public that it will in fact have the opposite effect of support for that position. So how the hell did this happen? Well, it all goes back, in my view, to those bailouts back in March. Let me explain. Trump and the GOP had a singular moment where they were taking coronavirus very seriously, where the markets were crashing, where the real political will for one of the most dramatic actions in American economic history was possible. And they used that moment to pass tiny stimulus payments to a limited number of Americans, bailed out large corporations, and then, for some reason, capped the assistance that they provided to small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program. After that, the markets came back. They said, you know what? We're done spending money. So we spent all that we need to spend. The virus wasn't going all that well, but they threw up their hands. There's nothing you can do, you know? It was the ultimate surrender. And that is when the lockdown debate began in full swing. The right decided that the chief problem facing the American public was no longer the virus, it was the shuttered economy. Thus, the solution was not to solve the virus spreading like wildfire through America, but instead to just simply push people back into the workforce. The mainstream GOP, from the president on down, became obsessed with this idea because the secret was if they could get people back to work and the economy juiced again, then they wouldn't have to spend any more money. They pursued this strategy despite the fact that the public broadly supported staying at home and did not want to open up restrictions, as you can see taken from a poll at the time of that debate. They promised people like me behind the scenes they would be lauded as heroes in retrospect for trying to reopen states early, and that in the long run, people would see that they made the right decision. How'd that turn out? You all know the answer. Look at the record number of cases in Florida, Texas, Arizona, and California. The right took their eye off the ball. They took their eye off the virus itself, which dictates whether people can eat out, spend money, engage in any real economic activity. And the public took notice. They saw their wallets continue to get thinner. They didn't appear any safer, despite being locked up for months. And they noticed a common theme: that the only thing the right seemed to care about was getting people back to work for the sake of not having to extend any more public assistance in a time of need. It's within that context that the school debate occurred. Americans simply don't trust the Republican Party or Donald Trump, their standard bearer, right now. 61% of Americans don't approve of Trump's handling of coronavirus, while a full 2/3 of Americans do not trust the information he is giving them. People see pretty clearly that one of the reasons that the mainstream GOP does not want schools to remain closed is because if they don't reopen, then millions of American parents can't get back to any semblance of a normal job or normal economic routine for at least another 6 months. They don't view it as compassionate. They just view it as the latest shortcut or the latest effort to wish-cast the virus away. This is a terrible state of affairs to be in, because I actually think schools should reopen. And if government and the credit had more credibility in this time, there's certainly a world where they could make that case affirmatively. But Americans don't trust that this government will execute on this properly after they've seen failures to contain the virus and failures to bail out average Americans. You know what? I really don't blame them. They're partially right. The mainstream Republican Party is content losing the election, content being on the wrong side of public opinion, and content advancing these types of policies as long as they remain in power, even if that is the minority, because then they can continue to cash the checks of donors and the business community. They will be handsomely rewarded for their failures while the rest of the country burns. And I think that was the singular insight I had, because I was really thinking about it. And I was like, on the schools thing, I'm like, these parents probably sick of having their kids around, all of this. And I'm like, in terms of childcare, it's a nightmare for many working class parents. I actually, literally walked past a mother to this morning who was like putting her kids back inside before on her way to school very early in the morning to go work. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, how can these people still not want schools to reopen?
Yeah.
And I realized they don't trust the government to actually do anything about it. And I don't blame them. Look at the case numbers. And they especially don't trust Republicans whenever they're like, we have to have schools reopen, because they see it's only because they want to get people back to work so they don't have to spend or extend any more public assistance.
Yeah.
And once you start to process that as an American citizen over what? How long have we been locked up? 4 months, right? Something like that?
Forever.
Forever. 100 and something days, it feels like. So the more that people begin to process that, they look at everything through that lens. And when you go out and you're like, I think schools should reopen, they're like, you're just trying to get me back to work.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to spend any more money.
Yep.
And you don't want to take the virus seriously. And it really is, I think it's terrible, because we're now in a situation where anything I think that the Republicans say, even if it's correct, like I said, I really think schools probably should reopen as long as there's enough robust testing and there's a lot of different ways in order to get around that at a certain point, the public is going to say, anything you're for, you screwed up so many times, I'm against it. I'm totally against you.
And you actually see now, not just the public, but you see more and more school systems who are announcing that they're going online only in the fall. And I do think, and I think the school reopening thing is really complicated. Like, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all approach. The data is mixed.
Right.
I totally understand why a school district would say, this is just not safe, right? Think of how careful they are when there's a snow day, right? Especially like around here, they're so careful about shutting down if there's even like the slightest hint of snow. Things are getting worse now. They are worse now in many of these states when schools were shut down to start with. So I completely understand the mentality of like, look, online learning is a joke. Let's be honest. It's it does not work. Kids are really legitimately getting set back. Of course, parents, especially working class parents, are going to struggle with this. But I understand the decision that school districts are making, and I really understand why parents would feel that way. But to your point, everything the president touches, he polarizes. And especially during this crisis, where rather than using the normal language that a president would use during this time, the type of language that Andrew Cuomo, the like, we're all in it together, and deferring to the public health officials and having that unifying tone, not just with the pandemic, but also on the protests. Instead, everything he does is to polarize, right? I mean, that Rose Garden speech this week is a perfect example. And so first it was, let's pin this on China and like play to the base in that way. And it didn't work because people were like, no. Okay, maybe you're right about that, maybe not. But like, let's talk about my life now, here
it
today.
Has to be both. That was the mistake. Is that, and I supported much of the China stuff in the beginning because I thought, oh my God, we have a real legislative economic opportunity here in order to have a massive trade war, rebalance our trade relationship for all time, and get a handle on the virus. I was a fool for trusting that any of these people actually would do anything tough on China, because they still haven't, and that they would ever get a handle on the virus. I take full responsibility for that, for even having a modicum of faith in these folks.
Rhetorical. It's just rhetorical culture war when, look, sometimes, that can work to gin up your base, but you, in a crisis, you have to actually deliver.
Exactly.
And then there's also this phenomenon of, back in 2016 when Trump was running, some of the issues that he focused on, they weren't majority support positions, but they were like 40%, 45%, right? And if you got that 40% super excited and you gin up turnout, then that's going to work out for you. You had a number of independents. Basically, people who didn't like either candidate broke for Donald Trump. Independents broke for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
This time around, the base is completely on an island. completely isolated, and their opinion is the polar opposite of the entire rest of the country. So like the polling data that you laid out on school reopenings, it's like a 1/3 versus 2/3 position. And that's the case on school reopenings, that's the case on shutdowns, that's the case on masks, that's the case on statues. Like every single issue that you go down the list, it's a 1/3 versus 2/3 issue. That is not going to work out for you, but because the president and the party and all of the media apparatus is just spun up around this basically like 30% of the country, they have completely isolated themselves from the mainstream of public opinion.
Yeah, and I think that, well, statues I'd say is like 50-50, but everything else is like 2 to 1. And I think that is actually the issue, which is that they continue in order to go. I don't know who these people are listening to. Truly, these are public polls. You can go and read it. All you have to do is be like, oh wow, people are pretty scared. I need to do a lot more in order to make sure that people feel safe in order to let schools reopen. Not threaten funding for schools to try and compel them to open without giving any real federal guarantee. Where is the rhetoric on every school in America, every principal, you will have every testing kit that you possibly need? Why is nobody saying that?
Yeah.
Why is that so difficult?
And we're going to help if schools want to reopen, and both of us have family members in education, so this is like a real conversation, not a theoretical one, not to mention I have kids who I'm hoping to send back to school at some point. If you want schools to reopen safely and follow anything approaching the CDC guidelines on this, they need funding. Yeah. I mean, the schools are underfunded and kids crammed in the classroom, teachers who don't have classrooms, they've got carts that they wheel around. I mean, it is crammed in right now. And so if you want them to be able to social distance, if you want to be able to, have them not congregate in different areas, they need more funding to do that. So if you actually want schools to reopen, don't make it a polarizing debate, number one. And number two, provide them the resources with which they could do that. And number three is the completely obvious one, which is actually get the pandemic under control. Then everyone wants to go back to school. And that's the other thing here, is there is an alternate universe. And you went back in your radar to like that moment when they actually look like they're going to take it seriously. And Trump's approval rating went up.
It was like 60%.
It was some of his highest ratings in his entire presidency, because it was like, oh my God, he's actually taking it seriously. And they're actually going to do something economically. And they're actually going to get this thing under control. And there started to be these pieces that were written. Remember, Jason Furman, I think, who was an Obama economist, talked to Politico and was like, look, I know things look bad now, but it could be that in the fall, you're having actually a record-breaking economy as things roar back to life. Not that it's going to get instantly back to where it was, but the increase in the trajectory is going to be some of the best that they've ever seen. And President Trump could be in an unbelievably strong position for re-election. That was imminently achievable. At one point, at that point, if you actually got it under control, that was imminently achievable. Now it looks like things are trending in a worse and worse and worse direction. And if you had to guess today, you would say these poll numbers will continue to deteriorate for him rather than recover.
I think they're going to get much worse, actually. 15 points could look like nothing because nobody's learning their lesson. Even right now, I hear Mitch McConnell and them are trying to come up with a plan in order to compel schools to reopen through funding. I'm like, this is a disaster, which is that it is a mainstream position on Capitol Hill and the Republican caucus right now, based on conversations I've had with many people who are over there, that say schools must reopen, we will be on the side of parents, eventually public opinion will shift our way. I heard it all before during the lockdowns. How did that work? Seriously, they never learn their lesson. Every single time, they're like, well, I got all of these business people who are on the phone with me. I'm like, that is not normal America. Nope. And they never learn. And I'm beginning to understand, I don't think they want to learn, because they all want to continue to take those people's calls so that those people can employ them whenever they're out of office. And if the country suffers, who cares? And if they lose power, again, who cares? They make even more money whenever they're in the opposition. So you know what it is? It's all a corrupt scam. All right. I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.